What's it like to run a software agency? How do you hire? How do you get business? How do you grow it over time? In this episode, I interview Jay Tower, partner at Trailhead Technology Partners. Jay shares how he helped grow the business from 0 employees to over 30 today. If you're interested in opening your own software agency, or you want to learn how to grow yours, this episode's for you. Let's dig in. So maybe to start us off, can you tell us just a little bit about Trailhead, what y'all do, how you got started?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's an honor. So Trailhead, we do custom software consulting. So we help our clients build custom software applications with all kinds of different technologies. As you can imagine, nowadays that includes things like React, which I know you know a thing or two about, cloud technologies, mobile, databases, all that stuff is pretty typical in there. Trailhead's been around now 9 years, and it started basically as some friends, me and 2 of my friends who had worked together in the past and had worked in consulting for most of our careers, and basically got to the point where we said, not only do we kind of see how this works now, after doing it for 20-something years, but we know what we want out of it, and largely what that is choosing who we work with. So we wanted to work with each other, and that's kind of how it started out.
I like that. So you start with people that you want to spend time around.
Exactly.
Like, I'm a big believer, anytime that you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, part of it is this idea of there's a life that I want to live here. There's value that I want to add, but like the people that you're around is such a huge piece of that, and being able to control that. So like, you get to control that with choosing your partners, but you also get to obviously control that by choosing your clients to some degree, choosing who you employ, obviously.
Yeah.
So you're sort of getting to mold your world to a degree. And I really like that aspect.
To a degree is a good way to say it too, because I think if you go into this type of a career change saying like, if I run my own business, then I won't have to put up with any other people who are annoying. That's not true, right? Yeah. I always like to say I have 1 fewer bosses than I used to have. So my wife still get to say about things. Right now I've got my 2 business partners who still get to say about things, obviously. Our client is still a boss, but there's nobody inside Trailhead that is up above me who I'm trying to keep happy all the time.
That feels good. So as somebody, I've been an entrepreneur to some degree my whole career, but I've had a full-time job for a lot of those years. So I was doing a lot of moonlighting, things like that, and authoring and the sorts of things. And the thing that I had pictured was that I wouldn't have a boss and I'd have all this sense of freedom and that my calendar would be wide open. There have been times that I've felt that, but a lot of the time I've looked at my calendar and thought, man, like it is as full as it was back when I was managing a team and had all these things. Do you feel a sense of enhanced freedom still, despite some of the give and take that happens there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think it's good, and it's a double-edged sword, I guess is a way to say it. It's most of the time I'm super glad, and I could not imagine ever going back to working for somebody else. It would be really hard at this point. But there's still days where the other side of that sword cuts back at you. So everything, the buck stops. If you're the owner, the buck stops with you, which means that when something crappy happens with a client, you have to figure out how to handle it. There's nobody else to kick it up to and say, not my problem. So double-edged sword, but on balance, totally worth it.
Good. So Trailhead, I often like to understand an agency by understanding not just what they do, but what they don't do. Do you guys have clarity about both of those? I mean, obviously, to some degree, it's easy for somebody to say, we're good at .NET, for instance, which I know you guys are great at .NET. What other things do you feel like make you special?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that make us special, but I think I'll answer your first question first, which is, do we have a definition of what we do and don't do? And in the early years, the answer to that was we thought we did, but we really didn't. Which I think is true for a lot of businesses. When you start out, you think you know what you're doing, and then you look back later and kind of laugh at yourself.
Well, is this because you didn't want to say no to money? Because sometimes it's really hard to say no to paid work when people say, I think you can do this, and you go, I could.
A great example of that is we had a client, we launched a new software application for them, definitely inside of our wheelhouse, right? Launching a new application. Then they said, well, we really need to train our users on how to do this. So who should we use to make the training videos? And we're like, well, we know how to do that. Is it the main thing we want to do? No. Is it money staring us right in the face? Yes. So early years, we said yes, and we just did those videos. And then we almost immediately looked back on it and said, our time could have been used much better if we were focusing on getting the next software project or something else related to what we actually are good at. And, I think we did fine videos for them for their training purposes, but it was a distraction.
Well, what you're getting at there is, I've made this mistake many times in my life, this idea of opportunity cost, where you go, I don't want to pay somebody $20 to mow the yard or $40 to mow the yard. I can go do it, but there's an opportunity cost there. There were other things that I could have been doing that might have been more valuable. And of course, I think I've also probably made the mistake of over-indexing on that too. Like, you can go so far where you go, your whole life is work, and you're so there's some parallels there that at least I've struggled with over time. I think I've finally found, like, looking at back to the agency idea. There are times that I might say yes to something, even though it's not our normal thing, because you go, this may be something that we really end up liking. We don't know. Like, this isn't our specialty. This wasn't in our plans, but there's a quote I heard the other day that's been on my mind, which is, the work isn't just work that you do. The work works on you. And this idea of the work works on you is, you take on this thing, and yes, you're doing the work, and you might get compensated for it in some way, but a lot of the value is just merely, you did this thing and now you are a different person because you took that on. And I think as an agency, are there times that you guys go ahead and say yes because it looks like a growth opportunity, because you want to try yourselves? And how do you navigate that too? And the reason I say navigate, because now you have this situation where, how candid do I want to be to a client? Like, I'm going to be learning. Maybe I'll give you a lower rate. Like, I'll be Googling fee is adjusted there.
Yeah. So, like, this is like behind the curtain stuff, but every consultant knows this, that you can't say no to stuff that you haven't done before. Maybe you've played around with a technology. Maybe you're confident that you could learn a technology. Maybe you've done a proof of concept. But if you said no to everything that you'd never done a production app in before, obviously you would never be able to get started with any new technology. So at some point you have to say, part of the solution to that we lean on is who you hire. So if you hire the right people who learn fast, are motivated to learn, like to learn, then that's not a problem. If you have the wrong people that don't check all those boxes I just said, it could be really problematic to say, here's a new technology. The go live date is 3 months from now. Good luck. That could be a disaster. So part of the way we solve that is that. Part of the way we solve that is we actually have what we call our technology tiers. So I won't bore you with the full list of them, because there's like probably 200 in there or something. But it's broken down into tiers of basically like things that are really in our sweet spot. .NET you mentioned, React would be in there, things that we really know well, and if given the choice by the client, we would probably recommend as our first choice. Then we have kind of another tier that's like, these are things that we know how to do, but we're maybe not as expert in them, or maybe it's not our first choice. And then there's kind of another tier that's like, these are things we have identified that we need to move up the tiers. And then there's kind of the poor little fourth tier, which is we don't really want to work with these technologies.
You don't have to name names.
Exactly.
Some come to mind for me. But
exactly. Yeah. PHP, we're looking at you.
Oh, there we go. You had to say it. Hey, PHP fed my kids for years.
Yeah.
I was quite happy with it.
There's a lot of people making a lot of money on PHP.
Absolutely. Still to this day.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, I like that you're being very explicit about it. So as an organization, people can see that. Yep. And like, I like that anyway. Just, the more that you put these things on paper, also the more that you can iterate on it and everybody can see it. So now it's something concrete and you can see objectively, this thing is on the tier 4 list, guys. Like, I know this looks lucrative, but there's a reason we put this at tier 4. Yeah. And that's effectively you guys saying, if it's on tier 4, for you, is that a definite no?
I would say it's a red flag or at least a yellow flag. So let me give an example. Because you brought up .NET before, we do a fair amount of .NET, ASP.NET web forms, right? This is pretty long in the tooth technology. If a client came to us and said, we have a web forms app we want you to add some new functionality to in web forms, we might say no to that. Yeah. If they came to us and said, we have a web forms app we want to migrate to something more modern, that's more interesting. So it's a bit of a foot in the door policy, I think you could say. We're willing to go to tier 4 if it's a foot in the door. Okay. But we're not really interested in going and putting, we pick all these great people to work with, and they're top tier people. Top tier people also have maybe the shortcoming of wanting to do interesting things. I don't think it's a shortcoming necessarily, but when you're trying to place people on projects, you could see it as a shortcoming, right?
Yes.
Because maybe there's millions of dollars of web forms work out there right now. And basically what we know is that our top tier people are going to leave eventually if we keep giving them web forms work for years and years and years. Mm-hmm.
It's strange. A friend of mine, Spencer Schneidenbach, he's got an agency too, and he loves working in web forms still to this day. Yeah. He goes, I understand it well. I can solve problems. And there's a certain aspect of, I think about metaphors in sports. You could hand Tiger Woods some cheap set of golf clubs, go out to Costco and just grab whatever, and he would still play an amazing game. Right, better than me. and yeah, same as me. Wouldn't say much, but yeah. And so in the same way, I look at a developer, I remember working in ASP Classic way back in the day and looking at other technologies that were clearly more desirable, because I was working in ASP Classic when .NET existed, because I still had clients that were back in there. Yeah. And I was looking at what was going on in ASP.NET and in MVC, for instance, and going, well, I could take a lot of these ideas and I can find a way to do that. And there's a certain, so for me, I enjoy the tooling aspect, and I really think we probably over-index on that in our careers, because early on it seems super scary to go, I'm not using the latest tech, I'll never be considered relevant. And you go, you can pick it up. Right. And if you're good at what you do in one tech and you can show people that and you're excited to learn more, you can get other jobs.
There's a lot of people out there making a lot of money on PHP, WordPress, web forms. I think what is important about us identifying those as things that we're not interested in doing long term is that we've identified, kind of for us and for the group of people that work with us, this is who we are. And if we try and do this other thing, we'll be pretending to be somebody else and we won't be happy.
Yes. Yeah, having that clarity is huge.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously, this whole idea of getting business is critical, and you talked about these different tiers, and that's a way that you perhaps decide whether to say yes or no, or at least how to maybe quote a price that might be a go-away price even. I've done that sort of thing before too, and you go, well, all right, at that amount, I will go ahead and do it, and you might be surprised. Yeah. But how do you get people into the funnel in the first place? Are you guys very deliberate about your marketing strategies?
Yeah, very good question. So the joke I always use when I'm talking about the software services industry that we're in is that it's really easy to get started. You don't have to have a warehouse. You don't have to buy a bunch of product and all that stuff, right? But it's much harder to sell ongoing. And the reason for that, I think, is that it's a very high cost and a very high trust service that you're providing. I think the closest thing that your off the street person is going to be able to relate it to is a general contractor to build you a custom house. Yeah. However, it's really more expensive than that, right? When we're talking about typical software projects, you're talking low six figures is going to be a small software project in enterprise, right? And millions of dollars is going to be a more typical, large enterprise software project. So when you're talking about those numbers, most people well, I guess house prices are going up a lot, but most people are not building multi-million-dollar houses, but a lot of people are building that kind of software. Yeah. And of course, also there's a whole range of quality out there. And so the thing that we have to find out how to get over the most is getting people we've never worked with to trust us, because they've probably been burned at least once with another consultant at some point in the past.
I don't know how often this happens to you, but I often feel like I'm the rescue guy. So people come to me and there's an airing of the grievances, and then I hear, okay, well, let's, and it's funny, like if back in the days when I was dating, which was a lot of years ago, I remember like if I'm talking to a girl and she's just totally bagging on her ex, I go, well, that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Like she may have expectations that I couldn't possibly reach either.
What's the other side of this?
Yeah.
Story, right? Yeah.
But when someone comes to me and they're specific about what happened, like, I mean, I had a client that came to me, they had spent over $3 million on a piece of software and they had nothing to demo. They said, we have code, but it doesn't run. And then I try to run it and I go, okay, there's literally hundreds of things to fix here to get this to run, but there is something here. You guys just can't see it. So we had to peel back and try to figure out whether to even keep the software in the first place. But you build a whole lot of trust if like I'm going to be hesitant to throw any stones here. Early on, let's just see what's there. And I go, to their credit, they were closer than it looked, but they just never quite got you to the demo. Like they made the mistake of, let's try to code a whole lot of features halfway instead of let's finish something and then let's finish something else.
Not a very agile process.
It's the opposite. Yeah. And so those sorts of things. I mean, how often do you feel like that's the case, that you guys are coming in and cleaning up a mess? Is it?
The serious answer to what we do is we're a custom software consulting company. The joke answer to what we do is that we are therapists for people who've been hurt by other consulting companies, right?
Yes.
So the first thing we have to do is get them to trust us. And that is a certain hurdle to get over. And then once we get past that, then it's to kind of clean up. Because a lot of times those things don't happen as a one-way street. Those things will often be enabled by the way that the client is managing the consultant.
Sure.
So often there's kind of a hand-in-hand process that we go through. And, you mentioned the name Trailhead of the company that I own. The full name is Trailhead Technology Partners. And there's kind of a double meaning to that. One of the things is we have sort of a law firm partner model as internally. But the other meaning, and the more important meaning to that, is that when we come alongside a client, we partner with them. It's a long-term thing. We're not looking to just drain them of all the money that we can and then move on to someone else. We really want it to be a long-term relationship. And so part of that is helping them figure out, here's how you can work better with consultants in the future.
Well, I love that you're emphasizing the long-term piece. Like I think about this all the time, that how much of business is thinking long-term, like going, if, and this even applies into any kind of a billing situation where you go, if you feel like, yes, I delivered, but I squeezed every last penny out of this, and you feel like, okay, you did it, but you left me frustrated by it. Or you went in and you went just by the letter of the law and you barely delivered what was required, but you could tell that I was disappointed. Get to the point that like people are really happy about it and they will refer you and more. That's just the nature of life.
I don't buy a lot of luxury products, but my understanding from my limited experience with it and from other friends who've done this, that when you buy a true luxury from a true luxury brand, it's really largely about the experience, right? Like there's you're buying a Lamborghini, say a salesperson walks you through the whole process. You're never alone. There's never any part of it that you have to figure out on your own. You never feel pressure, like as positive as possible. There's champagne at the moment of the signing, right? Like all the nice little things. And I kind of feel like consulting is expensive. And so it should also be kind of a champagne-y experience.
Yeah. Well, I really like that. So give me a sense. I mean, you don't have to share all your secret sauce here, but imagine that you do have an opportunity. It's a sales call. One of the first decisions that you make is that in person? Is that over the phone? And if in person, at their place or at your place, there's lots of nuance there. Do you have opinions in that area or things that you found that are helpful?
Yeah, so that very first sales call in this modern era is almost always online. a Zoom type meeting. And it's really practical for practical reasons. Clients are all over the place, all over the world, all over the country. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the odds at that point of closing the deal, it's small enough that it would be really time consuming and expensive to be moving all over the place just for that, 30-minute, maybe this is something. Mm-hmm. So is this something? Are we interested in working together? Those are the kinds of things that I'm trying to figure out. Where does this fit into our technology tiers that I was talking about earlier, right? Like, is this a PHP forever kind of a project, or is this no, this is like some modern things that I think our team would be really excited to work with, sure. Or at least moving in that direction or something. So all of those kind of questions I'm trying to answer. I'm trying to answer their questions to get them over whatever hurdles they need to get over at that part of the process. And then after that, it could involve some in-person stuff, if that's what it takes.
Yeah. So you all have, I assume, a distributed model. It seems like everybody does these days, or is everybody in the same city?
No, in fact, we really don't have two people in the same city. So even the owners, I'm in Michigan. Okay. My two co-owners are in California and North Carolina. Mm-hmm. So it's like we're almost as spread out from each other as possible in the lower 48. And then we've got team members that are all over the U.S. and all over the world as well.
Oh, international.
International, yeah.
Okay, so this is an interesting conversation then.
Yeah.
So especially having this mixture of in the U.S. and international.
Yeah.
I assume you started out just in the U.S. because it's just easier at first to pull that off before, or was it the other way around?
That's a fair assumption, but it would not be true.
Oh, you started international.
Yeah, we started international, yeah.
And where did you start?
So the majority, so granted, we started really small as well. There was two of the partners at the very beginning, and there was basically like 2.5 other people. So it was like 4.5, 5 people that were working at Trailhead at that very early.
And you choose this international, I assume, early on because you're going, okay, the rates are really reasonable.
Yeah, and they were actually people that we knew personally.
Gotcha.
That happened to be overseas, which also meant that their billable rates were lower, which meant that we could then kind of blend them in with our rates and have a more competitive overall rate.
Sure.
Yeah. So it kind of started that way, and it started as it's funny, like 9 years ago is when Trailhead started. 10 years ago, if you had told me that I would somehow be involved in owning a company that did outsourcing overseas, I would have laughed at you. So only a year before I did it, but it was a really great experience. You have these moments sometimes in life where you see something done a certain way that maybe you've never seen done that way before, and it like something just clicks in your head and you're like, aha, that is the way that is supposed to be done. And the reason that I've never liked it before isn't that it's not good, it's that I've never seen it done right before. So that's really how this outsourcing thing happened for us and for Trailhead, is that right before we started Trailhead, one of my partners and I saw it done really, really well, and something clicked for us, and we said, we know how to bring this to consulting and have it be something kind of new that doesn't exist.
What's the difference?
So, there's this like, there's all these terms out there for outsourcing that are like, nearshore, onshore, offshore, right? Like all of that. I think if you ask 10 different companies that use those terms to describe what they do, they probably all do slightly different versions. Just like agile doesn't really mean anything, right? Everybody does it differently. So what we found was that all of those models that we ever interfaced with didn't work real well. Like there were substantial problems with them. And
by all those models, you mean offshore, nearshore?
Yeah, all the like asterisks. Yeah, so I realize like in enterprise, those are a bit settled. Like those are things that everybody's like, yeah, there's going to be some nearshoring or there's going to be some offshoring or something. Mm-hmm. But when we interface with enterprise clients today in 2024, who are doing those things, we find all the same problems that we experienced 10, 15 years ago with those things still happening to this day. And so our experience with that is, I wonder if this is fundamentally part of outsourcing, or is this fundamentally part of how it's being done? And what we realized in that like aha moment just before we set up Trailhead is that there are ways to do this that actually work.
Can you share? I will press you if you don't want to.
Yeah, so I'll get into some of the things that we talk about all the time with our clients. So these aren't like secret sauce at all. Some of it is where you outsource to. If you are 12 hours off of the client, that's really hard.
That's a big problem. Yeah, one of my clients, in fact, right now, people in Egypt, people in Argentina.
Yeah.
We have a stand-up in the morning, and the overlap is basically the stand-up. Because Egypt they're ready for evening time. They're done for the day. Like that's too much. And to me, it's self-evident. Okay, yeah, so I agree.
So you might say, oh, okay, well, the solution to that is nearshoring then, right? Nearshoring solves that because now you're in South America or the Caribbean, somewhere more time zone appropriate for the U.S. or wherever you're doing your project. And yeah, that does check that box. But now you've got communication. So how well does everybody on the team speak English? And I say English that's my only fluent language, right? Which I feel like is a real double-edged sword for my life because I love to go places and try and learn the language. The second I try and say something to somebody in Italy and Iceland or wherever I am in their language, they immediately can tell that I speak English from my accent. And then they just start speaking to me in English. So, but English is this ubiquitous language. I've got a bunch of Microsoft MVP friends who are all from India. And at an MVP summit, I was at a table surrounded by them at one point, and I started feeling really guilty thinking like, oh, they're all speaking to each other. There's like 12 of us at this table. They're all speaking to each other in English just so that I can understand.
I've experienced that too.
Yeah. And I said something about it, like I'm feeling really guilty. And they're like, oh, no, we all speak different languages. English is the only language we all speak in common, right? So that's the thing with English. And so when it comes to our team, English skills are an important factor. Software is hard. Requirements are complicated. Language is nuanced, right? And if you don't all speak English real well, you're going to have a lot of miscommunication. So that's a factor. And then how you manage the team. So even the nearshoring model, the way I've experienced it, is managed a little too hands-off. So if let's say it's a company in the U.S., because that's most of our clients, company in the U.S., if they hire a team, let's say in Argentina, so that it's like a more nearshore type situation, and then they ask the project manager in Argentina to run that project, it's probably going to fail. That project manager needs to be where the project is happening with the people who are going to be using that project, or who know the ins and outs of what makes that work. They need to be able to sit down around a whiteboard together. They need to be able to use the same idioms when they're chit-chatting with each other. It just works a lot better that way.
And when you say it, it seems completely obvious. I think, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying there. And I think that's part of why we're seeing such a move toward like Argentina and Brazil and a lot of these. Like, solving the time zone issue is really important. And also just that balancing act that you're getting at there of how much you can offshore or nearshore versus in-house. So you tend to always have a blend there then. Because I've seen that work really poorly if everything gets outsourced. And in fact, as a consultant, I've come into some of those projects and it gets awkward because I can make a suggestion, but I'm making a suggestion to my client, and my client has this other third party that they've got over here, and now it's almost a game of telephone in some cases there. So I feel one extra step of abstraction away from the thing that I'm trying to optimize.
And software is hard, and I don't think you want to add layers like that if you can get away with it. Now, granted, if you hired all, six-figure people in the U.S., that's expensive, and so there's a balance to be struck there, and that's what we're trying to do, is find just the right sweet spot where all of those barriers and abstractions that you don't need can be removed, so that you're not adding extra friction to the system, but the rate is still lower than what it would be.
So I assume if I looked at a representative team, and I'm sure there's variety there, because backing up, you I thought have 50-something?
30-something.
30-something.
Yeah.
Okay, 30-something. And that, when you talk about that 30-something people, is it, can you give me a sense of how many of those are developers versus?
Yeah. The majority of them are technical.
Okay.
And then within technical, it kind of breaks down by different areas of focus, so front end, back end, QA is another big one. Mobile, obviously, is another one. And then we have sort of like a software architect project lead role. Okay. Those are primarily our US-based team because those are the people who are kind of running the day-to-day of the project.
And that software architect would be tied to a single project, or they flex across?
They would do probably 1 or 2 projects at a time.
Okay, there you go. So do you have anybody that is sort of a principal that's trying to lift all boats, that's just looking at all your projects and saying...
Yes, we do. And that is basically the partners right now.
Okay.
Yep. So the 3 owners we call partners. As our,
so that's sort of your day-to-day to a degree?
Yep, exactly.
Good job.
Thank you. So it's a little bit of a mix of obviously running the business is part of that, but also a little bit of a mix of an account manager and a enterprise architect, I think you could say, somebody that those software architects who are running the projects can go to and say, I don't know what to do about this. Yeah. So we kind of wear multiple hats in that way.
Okay. I stayed at my last full-time job for too long because I was a principal engineer, and basically my job was to lift all boats, and I worked with lots of different teams and always looking for ways to improve things. It was a wonderful job. It just because I didn't have people that reported to me. You just come in every day and you're looking for ways to help. It was so cool.
Was it ever hard because you don't get to ever take something to fruition, though? You're helping lift the other teams, and then they go off and finish the project, and you never...
That didn't bother me because there was still code that I was involved in that was making it to production. Now, I wasn't there the night that it pushed to prod, but as long as I knew that it did, that's enough for me.
Feel like a problem.
No, I don't. Frankly, I don't want to carry a pager or get a call. It's just...
You poor thing, you were in bed.
Yeah, isn't that nice? Yeah, that is another nice thing about moving up in that area. Yeah. Well, so you said something interesting earlier I wanted to circle back to. You talked about that the name is Trailhead, but it has very deliberately the word partners in there, and you said that it harkens to legal. Or
there's 2 sides to that partners. The one that really affects our clients is that we partner with our clients. So even the word trailhead, a lot of people maybe aren't familiar with that word. I know you're a bit of a hiker, so I imagine you're familiar with that word. For your listeners and watchers, in case they aren't, it's the beginning of a hiking trail. It's usually where you leave your car while you go off and do the hike, right? But symbolically, at Trailhead, it's also the beginning of a journey together. So we're consultants. We help our clients do the things that they're wanting to do. Yeah. That means giving them good advice. That means helping them pick the right technology stack. That means helping them get started or all the way to finishing maybe. So we're there at the Trailhead meeting them, and then we're partnering with them. We're walking along with them. We tried to kick around the word Sherpa at the beginning. It felt a little bit like what we were going to be doing, but it's problematic. It felt a little bit like cultural appropriation.
Well, it's just anytime you've got this metaphor, there's a point where the metaphor starts to feel forced. Exactly. So there's that gray line. I mean, I totally get what you're doing. I like the branding. Okay.
Yeah. So Trailhead, it kind of touches that, and then partner. Trailhead Technology Partners is the full name. So partner also touches on that. The other side of that, the legal side of that, is that the way that we set up the firm, it's like a partnership model, the way law firms are often set up.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So I also wanted to circle back earlier. We were talking a little bit about the billing side of things, and there's a rather religious debate among a lot of agencies. A good friend of mine believes very strongly to always do fixed bid, and there's like the ditched hourly guy. I can't remember the actual title, but nonetheless, what is your take on this divisive issue, hourly versus fixed? Do you guys do both? Or?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm curious now if it's the same person I'm thinking of that I've had arguments with over many a beer about fixed bid versus time and materials. Yeah. The vast majority of Trailhead's work, way over 90%, is time and materials. Okay. And there's some thinking behind that, as you might imagine. But let me talk about the exceptions first, maybe. The exceptions are when we're first getting started. So I talked about there's hurdles, trust hurdles especially, to get over at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And part of that is that usually on that first 30-minute call, is Trailhead a good fit for this project? Does the client need something that Trailhead can help with? Like all of those types of questions in 30 minutes. One of the things that I almost am always asked is, how much is this going to cost and how long is it going to take?
Sure.
Right?
It seems reasonable. Yeah.
It does. Now, as an engineer by background, I'm partially annoyed by that question, right? Because I know what you know, which is that there's literally 1,000 questions I have to ask you first. Yes. And in this 30-minute conversation, we're going to get nowhere near to that answer. So at Trailhead, we tried to figure out, like, how do we get over that? Because that's a totally legitimate question for them to be asking, or wanting the answer to, at least. Mm-hmm. They're asking it too early, but also they don't want to start going down a path. Maybe they've been burned before by a consultant where they've gone tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars down a path before they figured out that they didn't want to spend this much money on this particular project. So we noodled on it for the first couple of years, and we came up with something that we're pretty proud of, which we call just a discovery workshop. And the purpose of this is basically to get over that hurdle. So by the end of this workshop, we want to be able to answer those questions for you as far as how long and how much. But to get there, you need to give us some time. We need to sit with you for a certain amount of time. Usually we'll do it in a number of weeks, and we kind of do that like t-shirt sizing. Is this a small, medium, or large project? Okay, that's this many weeks.
And I didn't catch, is this build during this period? This discovery?
Yeah, one of the concerns we had going into it was that we're familiar with some people who did this type of work for free.
I've seen it both ways.
I've seen it both ways as well. And there are horror stories about clients who take advantage.
That's the risk.
Yeah. So what we came up with was basically, tell you what, we'll do it at a fixed hourly rate. Not hourly, weekly rate. We'll do it at a fixed weekly rate. We'll tell you up front how many weeks we think this discovery is going to be. And then at the end of that, we're going to give you all the outputs that are going to answer the questions that you have about should we or shouldn't we move forward on this project. If you find that valuable, you can pay that invoice for the discovery workshop. If you don't find that output valuable, you don't have to pay it.
I have a hunch that you guys nearly always get paid.
We have never not been paid.
I just recently read the book Influence by Robert Cialdini, I think is how you say his last name. Yeah. One of the things that he emphasizes in there is reciprocation is just built into humans. Yeah. And you'll see this potentially abused at some places. Like there are studies that have shown, I was out to dinner the other night, and there's a long line, and they brought us out tea while we're standing in line. I'm like, this is a nice little gesture. This is cool. And it makes it kind of special. We're waiting, and it's a little cold out. Yeah. But the fact that they give us tea, like studies have shown, if you are given something free, you tend to spend more. And even, this is the weird thing, even if they give you food, you will buy more food because they gave me free food, and I might not even realize it, but I'm naturally reciprocating for their generosity. Yeah, so there's some of that same thing that when somebody, because you went through all that work, and I don't want to pay you nothing. Even if I felt like, well, maybe it wasn't perfect, I'd go, yeah, but you put all this good faith effort in here, and now you're willing to let me decide whether to pay you. So I think people do the right thing. The other thing that I think applies to this here, and this ties back even to your billing thing, is that you have to remember that most of the time people are spending someone else's money. Like their company has a budget, and that changes the dynamic in a way that even somebody who might otherwise be cheap, for instance, is unlikely to be cheap when they're spending their company's budget. Right. So they're going to do what they feel like is the right thing ethically, even if they might have said, oh, I keep a little extra money in my wallet.
Yeah, but trust is still a big factor, right? Like even if your boss is the one who is signing the check, if you're the one who is making the decision and recommending it to your boss, you don't want to pick the vendor that's going to do a bad job. You want to pick a vendor that's going to do a good job and that's going to hit the estimated budget and so on. So trust is definitely still a major factor there. But I like your reciprocal thing because I've kind of thought of this as like the ancient origins of the handshake, which is basically like I don't have a weapon. And, when I'm Zooming with a client and it's, computer to computer basically, and we're trying to get over this fairly major hurdle of trust by me basically saying, like, we're going to do all this work for you and we're so confident in it that you don't have to pay us if you don't like it. That is me basically saying, I don't have a weapon, right? Yeah. And then they feel a lot more free to say, I also don't have a weapon. Mm-hmm. And it brings down that, it's that reciprocation. It brings down the tension of that situation. And now everyone's like, okay, Trailhead is stepping out and doing a trust thing here. Maybe we should meet him halfway.
Yeah, I like that.
So that's the exception. That's the thing that we'll do at a fixed bid. And it's about trust. It's about getting people over that hurdle of trust.
But it was weird that you said a weekly rate. Yeah. But are when you say weekly, are you committing a certain number of people to a full-time week?
It's not a full-time week. It's more of a calendar week of effort to get it. It's usually like one person who's the central thread that's running through that whole thing. They're meeting with the client. Maybe that, if it's a small project, maybe it's a 1-week discovery. Okay. Typically, the way that would look is that they would meet with the client for 1 or 2 days at the beginning of that week. They might then kind of pepper them throughout the rest of the week with quick follow-up emails or, hey, could we jump on a call so I could ask you this follow-up question? Yeah. But for the most of the rest of that week, they're going to be consolidating things. They might go build a proof of concept with the team to try and figure some technology out to see, is this the right thing to do here? Certainly, they're going to be consolidating a lot of information and creating architectural recommendations, tech stack, the order that these features could be developed in, creating an estimate for all that stuff. So that's kind of okay, now we're going to go away, and for the rest of this week, we're going to put this work together. So that's what we call a week, is basically one person's that's running that whole discovery workshops thread throughout a whole week of effort.
Okay, got it.
And frankly, we break even usually on that discovery workshop. But it's a huge sales tool because 99% of the time, clients will finish that and be very excited to get started.
Well, they also are now committed in a way. Like, you've gotten so much more face time with them to be able to prove, like, you're asking the right questions. That conveys expertise. You're showing care. And they go, okay, now I've got enough experience with them. I feel pretty comfortable.
Even if we haven't written a line of code at that point for them, there's a lot more trust at that point.
Oh, I think it makes tons of sense. Yeah, I really like that.
So speaking of trust, the other 90+% of the time and materials is what we do. And that is also really about trust. Because what we found over our years of experience, the partners that founded Trailhead, is that if you do a fixed bid project, then you also have to do change requests. And you also have to figure out whether something is a change or a defect.
That can put a strain on a relationship.
Yep. And then you also have to figure out whose fault everything is. Did the client not explain it to us right? Or did they not give us the information we need when we needed it? Or did we misunderstand something? That's our fault. Or did we just do something wrong? Right? And it automatically becomes this like blame-based relationship. And because of that partner word in the name, that's not the type of relationship we're looking for with a client. Now, I've got friends who will argue blue in the face that they found some way to do that. I just haven't seen it on a fixed bid. And
I think you and I are pretty well exactly in alignment, because I will do fixed bids for workshops, for training, because I know I'm going to be here for these particular hours. I've got this prep to do. Here's the syllabus. Like, we know what we're doing. So I can quote that. And people love that. It's easy to get it approved. But the nature of software is just what you're getting at. Like, there are just 1,000 different questions to ask. And also, we're going to be doing something we've never done before, or we just hand you the thing we've done.
Right.
There's going to be invention as part of this. Exactly. So there's a dynamic aspect. Yeah, I totally get it. So we're about out of time, but I want to ask a question that is in some ways self-serving, but I think everybody will find it useful. I have thought about opening an agency for a lot of years, and I've got this sort of romantic idea that, so my son right now is just about done with high school, and I've always thought that it'd be cool to have a family business. I've got younger kids that maybe would be interested too, and I thought maybe I would open an agency. What would your advice be to someone who is thinking about opening an agency, what does it look like to step out into the scary thing and say, I'm now an agency and I'm going to hire people? How do you decide to hire? Like, there's a lot of those things that, to me, as somebody, like, my only employee is my wife, and obviously that doesn't really count. It's a different thing. So how do you navigate that, and what do you recommend to somebody?
I feel like there's a lot of paradoxes that are built into the process of creating a business. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of things like, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, and I would never go back and not do it. Like, I would never tell myself not to do it. Bit of a paradox in that, right?
Well, you also have the 2020 hindsight that this was very successful, so that helps.
It doesn't hurt to look back and be like, oh yeah, it was worth it. But there's all the statistics out there about small businesses and how many of them fail, and I would say that don't do this if you don't have the energy to learn some tons of new stuff, basically for as long as you're doing it. Because what I've seen, especially in the services industry, is that when somebody loses their zest or their fire or whatever it is for learning and pushing and trying to make it better and grow it and all that, that is when that company dies. When the owner or owners hit that point where they're like, this isn't worth it anymore, or like, I'll see how this does if it coasts.
Yeah.
So I would say to people, don't do it if that's not how you feel, because it will now be this thing that is at least in the back of your mind 24 hours a day. You'll dream about it. You'll wake up thinking about it. You'll go to bed thinking about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, you need to have that level of excitement.
You need to have that level of excitement for it, because it'll be a real pain in the butt sometimes. But it's also very rewarding. It's something that you create from scratch. There's something about creating jobs that didn't exist before. There's something about creating software that didn't exist before. There's something about, for me, like at Trailhead, figuring out processes that you've seen done well and you've seen done not well, and then trying to make sure that they're done very well. There's something very rewarding about all of that. It's a creative act. And the reason I liked software from the beginning was the creative aspect of it. Like, oh, wow, I just made something that didn't exist before, and the computer is now like doing these things that I told it to do. That felt really cool and creative to me. So building a business can be that as well. It can be cool and creative.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that you emphasize more or less every day you're learning, you're figuring out, because this is the nature of growing a business in particular. Because like, you're at 30-something employees now, or 30-something people total. That's a very different business than when you've got 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And your systems have to scale over time. On that front, are you content at this size? Do you feel like you're right-sized? Do you have aspirations at this point?
At this point, we have aspirations to be bigger. Okay. But also, it's okay if this ends up being what Trailhead is. Like, that won't be the end of the world to any of us. But if it wants to be something bigger, we want to push and see if it goes there. Yeah. A little bit from that, can we do it perspective. A little bit, though, from the when you have 100 people, there's a lot more that you can do for your clients. You can have people who are really specialized in something that we couldn't afford right now because we can't keep that person busy all the time, right? Mm-hmm. You can't have an expert in say a data scientist. We can't have a data scientist on staff until we have 40 hours a week for a data scientist to do something, right? Yeah. But at 100, theoretically, you could have some data scientists on your team, right? Sure. So that's the kind of thing that I think we want to push and just see what can we do better for clients, what can we accomplish, how can we make this a more interesting thing for everybody involved if we make it a bit bigger.
Yeah, finding the right size. I really like DHH. He talks about this very thing of, they haven't tried to make Basecamp some massive project. They're happy with the size. And I guess I shouldn't say Basecamp. I can't ever remember. Are they 37 Signals again? Or obviously they've been super successful, but I've enjoyed their reading, and I think about that very thing. And then this happens to everybody, like this more is not necessarily better. More employees is different. And I even heard somebody say recently, this has been on my mind, that you can never add someone to a team. That the moment that you put someone else on a team or you take someone off a team, you have a new team. Because the dynamics change. Like sometimes you even have a situation where two people might not get along, but this third person kind of helped make that work, and you take that third person now, and now all of a sudden the team doesn't work. So it's very unpredictable how adding or removing people can change things there.
I have this philosophy that a company wants to be a certain size, and that if you fight it, it's not going to work, but that every time you grow a company, you do have to push to make it happen. So there's a little bit of like pushing and seeing how it goes. I would say that's kind of what we're doing. We're pushing and seeing how it goes.
Awesome. Okay, so this is an odd question, but I'll close out with this. Is there anything that you were hoping that I would ask you that I didn't?
Right at the beginning, we talked about the thing that I think is the most important, which is the people side of it. The most fun, and so I was hoping we would get to talk about the people angle of running a business, because starting a company with your friends that you really want to work with, that in a lot of ways are like your spouse. It's like another spouse. There's days where I spend more time with my business partners than I do with my spouse. So like it's another marriage style relationship almost. Commitment wise. But to like pick the people that you really want to do it with and form it that way. And then to surround yourself with the kind of people that you want to work with and the kind of clients that you want to work for. That is by far the most fun part about it. So I'm really glad that we got to cover that right from the get-go.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Like, the people you're around every day. I even think about, like, you guys had the choice too. You could have tried to go on your own, but coming together, like, this is a feature. Now we get to spend time together, and that's right. And you already had a history as well. I think that's important too. Like, not just here's somebody that I barely know that I met at some conference. No, you really feel like you can trust this person, because you were basically taking whatever happens in the future and splitting the pie very obviously.
This is my third company with one of my two co-founders and my fourth with the other. Wow. So we've known each other for a while.
That's fantastic. I think it's also just wonderful having relationships that have that, like, I like the saying, you can't make old friends. Like, they're just, because to a degree, I imagine that's the case too. That's wonderful. Okay. Well, Jay, I really appreciate it. So I'm going to break the fourth wall and look at the camera for a second. Like, Jay was really nice. We're sitting in some hotel room. I've never recorded in person before. He came in here and was just pulling out random cables, helping plug things in. He brought his own microphone, like, credit for that. I've never recorded in person, but assuming that everything's still recording right now, this may work. Jay, this was a pleasure, man. Thank you for joining, and thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click like and subscribe. That really helps. And if your team's working in React, I can help. You can find me at reactjsconsulting.com. Happy coding.